Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the chance to talk to you, and thank you for the insights that I heard from the previous speakers. I will focus on three main arguments. The first argument is from the perspective of constitutional law. The second argument is an argument from theology. And the last argument is an argument from reason. First of all, I'll start with the constitutional ground. Article 15 reads, marriage as an inviolable social institution is the foundation of the family and shall be protected by the state. You know, a key rule when reading a statute or reading a constitutional provision is to abide by its terms, to go by what is conveyed by the ordinary meaning of its terms. So what could the terms inviolable social institution mean? I cannot see how one can advocate divorce and at the same time uphold the constitutional provision that marriage is an inviolable institution. One of the speakers mentioned the grounds for divorce that are presently in place in the bill that is pending before the Senate. And there are grounds that are known as grounds for no-fault divorce. Among them, the rather ambivalent ground of irreconcilable differences. And as his examples very well showed, irreconcilable differences could be anything at all that the spouses cannot agree on. An inviolable social institution that demands the protection of the state is an institution that the law cannot compromise by allowing for divorce. And a state would certainly violate its constitutional obligation to protect this inviolable institution were it to allow for divorce. I am not oblivious to the fact that many of the proponents for divorce have quoted Father Bernas, who was one of the members of the commission that drafted the 1987 Constitution. In his very popular commentary on the Constitution of 1987, Bernas advances the view that this provision, notwithstanding, it was not meant to foreclose a divorce law. That is his opinion. That is his view. It is possible that that is the understanding that those who passed the Constitution, those who crafted the Constitution may have had. But it is also a fundamental rule of constitutional interpretation that it is not what the authors say they intended that prevails, but what the words of the Constitution mean, and mean especially at the time that the Constitution was enacted. The second argument I have is an argument that comes from reason. You see, if you grant divorce, you will either grant it on some grounds or on all grounds. Now, if you grant it on all grounds, you make a mockery out of marriage, and you might as well not have the institution of marriage at all. But if you grant it on some grounds, then you are assuming that the misery of the couples who are in the union that you recognize to be susceptible to divorce is worse than the misery of the union or the misery of persons in unions that are not covered by the grounds for divorce. In other words, you say, we will grant divorce for reasons A to D, but we will not grant divorce for reasons E to G. Question: on what grounds do you assume that those in E to G are better off than those in A to D? That is a clear demonstration that there is arbitrariness in regard to the grounds selected for divorce. When divorce exists, couples who have differences will no longer make any attempt to mend their differences, no matter that mending differences is possible, because there's a back door. There is divorce. And so they will prefer to take the back door out of marriage, which is divorce. On the other hand, if as now there is no divorce, couples with their differences, and they will always have differences, will endeavor to mend their differences, will endeavor to live with their differences, will endeavor to come up with a union that lasts, their differences notwithstanding. Third point from reason is, I think that society has a right to expect that people live by their promises. A society where people can no longer be counted upon to live by their promises is not worthy of human beings. That parents commit themselves to the care and education of their children, that is one kind of a promise that we can and should rely on. In fact, the current state of affairs, the deplorable state of affairs, where so many people who have been vested with the mantle of authority have betrayed their trust, is symptomatic of a society that does not take its promises seriously anymore. And we only exacerbate that by exposing even its most sacred institutions to the decision of persons to renege on their promises. I now move on to a theological argument. Insofar as the Catholic Church is concerned, the marriage of two persons is not only a covenant, it is a sacrament. In traditional theology, a sacrament means something tangible by which the believer has a saving encounter with the glorious Lord. The traditional definition was a visible or sensible sign by which grace is conferred. And we say that the sacrament of matrimony is a sacrament because it sacramentalizes the union of Christ and his church. This is a point that even some Catholics do not understand. When a person is baptized and water is poured over the head of this person, be he an adult or a baby, it is not as if his sins are washed away. Because a sacrament is an efficacious sign, his sins are in fact washed away. When a sick person is anointed with oil, accompanied by the prayer of the church, it is not as if the church lays its healing hand on this person. The church is in fact bringing this person healing through the sacrament, whether it be healing that restores him to physical health or the healing that promises him life eternal. And so when we say that marriage is the sacrament of the union of Christ and his church, it is not that marriage is some kind of an analogy or a metaphor or a simile for Christ's union with his church. Rather, the union of a man and a woman and a man in marriage brings about the union of Christ and his church. And because Christ can never be perfidious to his church, because Christ can never renege on his promise to his church, because Christ can never turn away from his church and cast her away, neither can a spouse cast away his or her spouse. Neither can a spouse turn away from his or her spouse. The first speaker made very good observations on public theology, and I am in full agreement with them. I'm sure that in his studies he came across my remarks in regard to the RH bill. At that time, my position was, well, the state being what it is, being constitutionally secular, in order to be able to practice, to safeguard the freedom of religion, the church cannot really cause or cannot really impede the passage of a bill that originates from a state that is sectarianly neutral. And it is for the church to educate the faithful. Why am I not maintaining that same position now in regard to the divorce bill? The reason is that in respect to reproduction, particularly artificial reproduction, the theological dissent does not allow for a clear, univocal position against artificial contraception. In the case of divorce, however, the teaching of the church has been constant, universal, and unchanging on the unity and the indissolubility of marriage. Do I maintain my position that the state as a secular state can pass laws, even those that go against Catholic teaching? If all that we're talking about is can possibility, of course it can. That is exactly the nature of a secular state, but the continuing protest of a Catholic, no matter that he knows that eventually a divorce bill will be passed into law, the continuing protest of a Catholic has prophetic worth. It has a prophetic value. It is a way of standing for a beleaguered institution upon which the church bestows its protection. It's a way of announcing a value that is no longer popular in the contemporary world, but a value that has been so crucial to the care, nurturing, and flourishing of human society. I wish to thank Tyler and the organizers of this forum for inviting me. Thank you very much.